Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another Addicted Fishing video. Guess what? We need to refreshen the 360 tutorial, but I couldn't think of a better day to do it than right now. We're just dropping in. It's early buoy 10 season. I've got a little bit of bait. We got a little bit of super baits. We got a little bit of everything, but most important, we're gonna be talking 360s. Let's dump some rods on the water and let's get to it. 22, 24, 26, just to start, guys. Double check. Oh wow! Double check dragged a little bit. That one was really tight. That could have got nasty. Okay, so we just got some lines in. Got good buddy Casey Kelly helping me here. But first thing, before I put this last rod in, I want to show you guys a little bit about the equipment that we like to use when fishing a 360. But even before I do that, I always want to say this one thing. A lot of people seem to think in the salmon world that 360s are the catch 'em anytime, all the time, everywhere, silver bullet, if you will, to catching salmon. And the reality is it's not. It's another great tool to use, but there are time and places that you may not want to use 360s. So before you guys get in your head that 360s just work all the time, just realize it's just another arrow in your quiver. It's something else to use. It's another technique to use. It's a very effective technique, and obviously it's taken over the Northwest by storm, especially in the freshwater fisheries in the river, but it's not the silver bullet that works all the time. But we're gonna talk about it right now. So before we get into leads and some of the other equipment we do, we gotta start with the rod. And one thing about 360 fishing, which I'll talk about later when it comes to the trolling technique, is that you generally use a lot of lead. This is not a fishery that you want to come out, or a technique that you want to come out and fish a real light limber rod. You're not talking stuff like your 10 to 20 ain't gonna cut it out here. You're gonna need your 15 to 30, your 20, 40. I prefer the 𝗛𝗘𝗟𝗣 Classics in the heavy and the extra heavy. Anything from 9.5 to 10.5, even their 12-2 rod will give you the right thump, but it's real important to make sure that you have a rod that can handle the lead that you're gonna be using. Next, we're going to talk about the reels, and one thing with 360 fishing is that generally you fish a lot of times suspended. We're using our electronics to target fish, but also we're trying to replicate when we do catch fish that the depths and the distances we are from the rod. So we use an Okuma cold water line counter. I would not recommend going fishing without a line counter reel. It is so important to have, because if you get fish, or once you start getting comfortable with the speed that you troll and the weights that you're using, you're going to be able to dial in and get this presentation in front of these fish more often and a lot quicker at the start of your day. Next, guys, from the nuts and bolts part of this conversation is the line. You are gonna use a heavy line and you're gonna want it to be braided. Heavy monofilament doesn't really have a time and place here because you got a lot of stretch with heavy mono and you got a lot of drag. One thing about this type of technique is the equipment we're using tends to drag a lot. Those flashers drag. You don't want to be adding to that. So you're going to want to do a good quality braided line, and a 50 to 65 pounds seems to be kind of the good range. We've got the Addicted bright orange braid, so I can sit around and look and see what my line angles are, make sure everything's fishing down and fishing proper. But the Addicted orange braid is a good line to start with. It's got a nice round feature. It's very durable. Like I said, this is not the fishery that you come in with light gear, so the Addicted orange braid is the way to go. And now on to the meat of the setup here, guys. So I've got that Addicted braided line, and what I like to do is I like to take like a black Sharpie marker and run it up the line just for the bottom 5-6 feet, just because I'm kind of particular, and it is a bright orange line so we can see it, but I don't necessarily think that the fish, you know, may or may not be able to see it. So to just get that out of my mind, I like to take a black Sharpie and I run up about 6 feet of that. You don't have to do that. I've caught plenty of them without doing that. But before I get a million questions in the comment section, that's why that line looks dark. What I've done here is I've taken a VIP line lock and I've slid that up the line. And these little handy things absolutely are paramount to 360 fishing, because what they do is, if you guys watch right here, that slider drops that top of that bead chain into a little slot there. And what that does is it allows the rest of the chain to spin, but it locks that. That's why it's kind of called a line lock. The importance of that is because with this Short Bus Series 360 flasher spinning around back here, if you don't have something like that to stop the twist going up your line, you will ruin your braid. When braid gets twisted up, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, it actually weakens and it starts to wear easier, because instead of it being nice and flat and smooth, it has a bunch of ridges on it that run through the eye, run through the reel, and it actually weakens the line, and you'll start breaking some of these lines. Like I said, big fish, big fishery, big equipment. So we want to make sure that we do not have any weakness points anywhere. So VIP line lock followed by a 6 bead chain swivel. Once again, it just helps eliminate the twist, and these things are super strong. You know, you don't want to fish a very tiny little swivel here because we're fishing 50 and 65 pound test. We're going to need the strength in that swivel to work. Now we're going to get into the bumper, and what I have here, guys, is I have a 50 pound monofilament that I have tied between two 6 bead chain swivels. What I don't have here is a pre-made bumper, and it's not because pre-made bumpers aren't going to work or not effective, or the guides just don't prefer to do it. But I'm at the start of my buoy 10 season, and unfortunately I do get a lot of tangles, and a lot of things happen to these bumpers when we're fishing clients, we're fishing every day. For me to start my season down here, I would have to have 250 pre-made bumpers. So what I've elected to do was just go with a monofilament bumper of 50 pound test. If you're using a 24 inch or an 18 inch pre-made short bust stiffy is what they call them, they work excellent and they're extremely handy to have. They're super easy to clip in and clip out, and obviously come in convenient lengths that we're all going to want to use. Now the length of my bumper right here is 24 inches, and if you ask 20 different 360 fishermen what their preferred bumper length is, you're probably going to get 20 different answers. What I've settled on is a length that works for me when I'm trolling at the speed that I like to troll and at the thump that I like to have for my rods. And the reason why that takeaway is important is because the shorter the bumper length that you have, the faster the thump you're gonna get out of a 360 flasher, just because the rotation is that much tighter. So as you're trying to figure out 360 fishing and you're trying to get out there and get your feet wet, make sure you're always paying attention to your bumper length, and make sure you're finding out what's effective for you and how you like to troll. Because out of everything that I'm going to show you in this basic setup, this bumper length is probably the biggest variable that can change your fishing from being effective to basically watching everybody else catch fish. So now on to the 360 flasher itself. What I've got here is a short bust chrome dipped Super Series flasher. I really prefer the short bust flashers just because of the two fins. They have a nice thump, they're very durable, they're quick and easy to change in and out, and the finishes hold up really good. This thing gets thrown around the boat, gets thrown in nets, and it just seemed to last, and they're just absolutely beautiful. You know, you're trying to get a lot of flash down the water, you're trying to attract fish. I can't think of a better flasher to do so than that right there. I mean, it's a freaking mirror. We can see Sean in it. Do you see Sean in it? Sean, can you see it? Sean's waving at you guys. That's how flashy these flashers are. He makes a ton of these in different colors and different combinations of UV and chartreuse and everything. We'll talk a little bit about flashers later, but for me, it's got to have some elements of chrome in it, like whether it's chrome and chartreuse, whether it's chrome and UV, chrome and white, chrome and scale pattern. Like, you definitely want to have a little chrome. You're trying to flash, you're trying to get that fish's attention. Chrome does it. But I've got that in between two big duo snap leaders. And the reason why I have the duo snap leaders, so I can change out my color combinations if I want to. I can do that very quickly. And then if I do get a tangle or I do get something along the way that I need to like repair or quickly replace the rod, I can just pop the duo snap off, replace the flasher, or I can take this off so I can help untangle a mess and get back to fishing quicker. Now on the bottom end of the Short Bust Super Series flasher, I've got another 6 bead chain. Once again, strong, helps eliminate line twist for whatever else I'm throwing down here. It's just a really good option that doesn't seem to fail. Then I've got a 45-pound duo snap on this, and what I use this for is so I can reattach and attach leaders very quickly. If I catch a fish on it and I damage a leader, I can hand this whole setup to a client. Anybody can do it. You clip it on and you're good to go. And after that, I don't try to put too much more gear on there, because I think a lot of times if I see people with 3 or 4 different swivels or a couple double bead chain stuff, I think it gets a little too much and it might weigh the flasher down, causes a little too much chaos, I guess, around this 360. So I try to keep it really simple, and I've just got those 2 duo snaps right there to do that. Now what you put on the back of the 360 we're gonna go through, but right here I've just got a little short bust spinner, a couple hook combinations. I'm gonna go through some of that. But generally what I like to have is a leader length that's somewhere between 24 and 36, 38 inches. The reason why is because this flasher is putting so much action and so much movement in the water that it's actually good and beneficial to have this lure being pulsed or being pulled around by that flasher behind it. Let me show you. Okay, let me show you guys what I mean by when you see that flasher moving and it's actually pulling the bait around with it.
So here goes fish, back rod.
Go. Bring those up, suck them up. Those out?
Yeah.
Ooh, big one. Big fish.
Oh. Yeah.
Woo. That is not a little one. Whoa. Hatchery.
Oh, it's a hatchery, look at that.
All right, guys. We love fishing while we're doing tutorials. And what we got here is a big keeper. It's actually the first one my boat's gonna get here at buoy 10. But the thing about it is we're all fishermen and we have a lot of good fish in the freezers and in our fridges right now, but Hatchery Fish. But it's a big old freaking toolie. Kind of smell it from here, big rounded anal fin. So sorry, thanks for the interruption, buddy, but we're gonna let him go and get back to talking 360s. So, and I know it's kind of hard to do and kind of hard for you guys to see right now, but basically that spinner is being kicked one way or another every time that flasher rotates. And it's real important to put movement, because anytime you get that little jerking movement or any kind of pulsing movement, it's gonna entice the fish to bite that much more. So that's one of the aspects of a 360 on why I think it's so effective. You know, not to mention, of course, all the flash that thing puts out, but it puts the movement on the bait. Salmon can't resist. That fish right there that just got caught was on a nice little spinner there. And same setup, we had the same bumper length. We had a 24 bumper length. We had, I think, a 34 leader length. And shoot, it's just whipping around back there. Fish can't resist, as you guys just saw. All right, so now that we've done the nuts and bolts and shown you guys the equipment and some of the basics, I'm gonna pull out my tackle boxes here, but we're gonna put this rod down in the water and see if we can get one on this too. So I talked about earlier on how we do suspend fish with this technique a lot. There's certain parts of the tides, like when the tide's running really hard, outgoing tide, that the fish like to press down towards the bottom because the current's not as swift on the bottom as it is on the top. Right now, we've got this incoming tide, and that's that back rod floating around back there on the 360. You can see the weight, you can see the line coming to the weight, the flasher moving up and down, and that's the bait, the spinner behind it. The only reason why I wanted to demonstrate is because that Chinook came up and bit in 40 feet of water, but yet our bait is sitting down there at about 16 to 18 feet. But one thing to remember is that I'm at 26 on the counters on these back rods. So it's not necessarily feet out on the counter is exactly where your bait's gonna run, because they drag so much. And we're using heavy leads. I'm using 16, 18, and 20 in the front right now. But I'm always gonna wanna use a little more lead than I think I really need. And the reason why is because if I plane these baits out, and now that bait is up in 5 feet of water or 6 feet of water way behind the boat, it's just not gonna be as effective if it's down to where those salmon are. So I wanted to show you guys that just real fast, because that's going to be in the background. We're utilizing this actually to find and see salmon. You know, it's early in the season, we're not seeing much on it, but now we're going to talk about what to troll behind that 360 Super Series. I got a big collection of lures here. We're going to talk about some of the Brad super baits. I'm just going to kind of run through them real fast, because I'm going to show you a couple different hook setups. But pretty much when it comes to Brad super baits, you've got the original right here, the original cut plug, a mini cut plug, and then there's also a kokanee cut plug that is much smaller than this guy, and unfortunately I don't have them in the boat today. Not that I would not use them down here in the buoy 10 fishery or for big salmon on the Columbia River, because they are an extremely effective lure. I literally just left it at home. Apologize for that, guys. But I'm gonna show you guys a couple important things when you're trolling these when it comes to rigging. So leader lengths, guys, can vary between 28 and 36 inches, but you are still gonna wanna use a minimum of 40-pound test. When you have that flasher moving around and you have this bait behind it moving around, the fish aren't coming up and intuitively looking at the line and seeing the leader and going, nah, I'm not gonna bite it. Most of the time our leaders that we're using are 40 and 50 pound because you are towing this big gear. You've got big heavy rods. You catch big fish just like that 20-pound tool bag that Casey just caught. Yeah, it was a toolie, but it's all good. But ultimately we wanna make sure that we're gonna land those fish, so we're using a 40-pound minimum here. This is the Brad's Mini, as I talked about. I've got a 2-hook setup, as you can see right here. Now, with a 2-single setup, I've got a small gap in between, and it's really important to have that gap so the hooks can swing freely and to stick into a couple places into the fish. If you tie them too close together, it does seem like your landing ratio is just not as high. So I like to have about a 1-finger space gap in between those hooks. And then the most important aspect of this bait is I've got these beads sitting here on top of that top hook, and what that is doing, it's providing spacing between the bait and the hook, so the hook always is going to swing freely behind the bait. It's never going to catch. If those beads were not there, the hook will sometimes lay against the side of the bait, and I don't think it's as effective as far as hooking up, because when that thing is hanging back there, the fish comes up behind it, those hooks are free to grab anywhere into that fish. If it's laying up against the side, you're gonna miss a lot more. And you know what? When it comes to 360 fishing, we're gonna talk about hooking and landing fish a little later. But you definitely wanna give yourself every opportunity to hook that fish as you can. So make sure that you've got spacing, and that goes for all the lures, the originals, the minis, the standard cut plugs, and the kokanee cut plugs. Following it, that little guy's following it, look at it. Speed up, speed up. Oh, he's going away, that's him. He's going at it again. It's not that rod, no. Oh, that's that back rod there.
You think that's a salmon?
That was something small, no. Now the huge advantage of the Brad super baits is that they all open up and have this cavity that you can stuff with bait. Now down here in the estuary, sometimes we can take little fillets of herring and anchovies, crush it up, stick it in there, mash it up, do whatever you can. Or for the most part, you can just use a can of regular old bumblebee tuna, and it's an extremely effective scent or bait for salmon. You can take that tuna also and mix it with Procure bait scents, as far as like anise bloody tuna, garlic, just standard anise. There's a million different scents out there, and when you have a lot of people out fishing an area, sometimes it does pay to be different. So utilize your Procure bait scents, utilize the bait that you can put into the Brad super bait, and you're gonna end up getting some more bites. So guys, let's talk about spinners, as we just caught that fish on them. I've got a couple different rigging setups to show you guys, and I kind of want to walk through some of the important parts of the spinner that you don't want to overlook. Once again, we're going to run 50-pound test, and the reason why I'm definitely going to run 50 and not 40 is because a lot of the clevises that we use, as it's spinning on the line, it can weaken the line, and it seems like if you go anything less than 50 pound, you're eventually going to break that leader, and it's going to break right there on a big fish. I've got the little Worth clevises here, but there's some other plastic clevises that you called 𝗪𝗡𝗠s, and you can use those, but what you don't want to do is cut off a spinner wire and then use the clevis as meant for a spinner wire. A spinner wire clevis is not meant for a mono clevis. So I want to talk about that. 50-pound test, always needed. And my length here is about 30 to 32 inches. Play with your length. Sometimes on days they want a very short leader, 24 inches, 22 inches. Some days when they're a little shy, they want a longer leader. I've caught them all the way up to like 40 and 48 inches. So play with your leader length, figure out what's effective for you, especially on that day, and don't get stuck with the magic bullet length. Don't say, oh, it's always 28. 28 is gonna catch them all the time, and that's just what I'm always gonna fish, because you're gonna be missing out on a lot of opportunity. So 50-pound test. Now, this is a little hoochie spinner that I have kind of rigged up, and a couple key notes is that if I'm gonna make my own spinner, I'm gonna make sure that I have enough beads that I'm gonna always have clearance on that spinner blade. I've got the short butt spinner here, and it's really important that that spins freely and quickly in the water and it just doesn't hang up. Once I pull this hoochie down, you guys can see I still have two hooks. I've got a single and then a treble in combination, but most importantly, again, I'm gonna have a gap between my hooks. I want those to swing freely. I want them to grab a lot of different places in the fish, and if they're tied really tight together, they don't have that flexibility to do that. I'm not gonna land as many. So making sure that I've got a good gap there. And honestly, you can run 2 singles, you can run 2 trebles, you can run a treble single combo. There's lots of different combinations to do, but making sure that I have the gap is probably the most important part of all that. Now the third thing that we'll put behind those Super Series is bait. A lot of people don't realize that you can use an anchovy, you can use a herring, but you want to make sure you pick your spots where you're using that, because if you put bait and you have really heavy current, the flashers are whipping around, it puts a lot of pressure on the bait. It's going to blow those cut plugs out. You can use anchovy helmets, you can use a couple things to help, you can brine your bait, you can do a couple things to help toughen those baits up, but bait is a very good tool to use behind the 360s, but you definitely just want to avoid doing it in very, very fast currents. So there's really not much where you're going to stray outside of the normal bait that we're going to troll around here behind triangle flashers or with just a mooching lead. You know, you want to make sure that your bait is spinning. You don't want to have a bait that's too big that's going to affect the action of the flashers, and that honestly goes for all these setups. Using spinner blades that are going to be in the size 5, 6, 7, using really big blue label cut plugs, having any of that stuff that's going to slow down the action of the 360 is going to make it honestly not as effective as it could be if you were using a little bit smaller bait and getting that whip from the 360. So most of my bait rigs that I have tied up are going to be just 4-finger gaps, because I'm probably not going to use anything bigger than a green label cut plug or like a small maybe 4 to 5 inch anchovy behind my 360s. Couple key points with any of the baits that you're going to put behind that: you're still going to want to use a minimum of a 40-pound leader, because you still have to land those big fish with that heavy gear. 40-pound leader minimum, and a heavily brined bait. That's all you need. So we've been trolling here for quite some time, and we've only gotten that one fish. We probably need to make a move. But the rods are fishing very effectively right now, because we've basically put the right amount of lead on there, and as you can see, it's got the right thump. But as the tides change and as the spots that you're going to fish change, sometimes you're going to notice that the rods are going to be like planing out or thumping a little bit too hard. The cool thing about the flasher is it's always telling you what's going on versus like a triangle. So if that flasher is thumping too fast or not thumping at all, you've got to move the boat either with the trolling motor, or you got to move locations to where the flasher is always trolling effectively. Whether that's upstream, whether that's downstream, whether that's against the current, for the current, with the current, whatever it might be, whatever depth it might be, because you sometimes, especially down here in this estuary, you have different layers of water where like the top 10 feet, you might be trolling with it, but if you drop that flasher down a little bit deeper, all of a sudden it's thumping and pulling real hard. You always need to be adjusting your troll to what the flasher is telling you. So a lot of people ask the question like, should I troll this upstream? Should I troll it downstream? That's the wrong question. It's the answer is always going to be, you should troll to whatever the flasher is telling you that it's actually working correctly. And to put an underscore on that whole statement, there's even times, especially down in some of these bigger, heavier current areas like the Columbia River Estuary, where we're actually trolling in reverse just to slow the boat down, because where the flashers are thumping, sometimes thump too hard if you're trolling forward or even in neutral. So like I said before, just to put that underscore on that statement, troll to however the flashers are telling you that they are working correctly.
And just to put another exclamation point on everything, if there's just one thing I could say, it's 24, go fast. Everyone knows 24, go fast. Let's see it in the comments.
All right, so he wanted to bring it up, so now we're talking about it. The thing about 24, go fast is a relative term. It's a relative to whatever that person thinks is fast. I think the main premise about that is generally when people are not being effective with the Short Bus Super Series flasher, is a lot of times they're trolling too slow versus too fast. So Marlon loves to just tell everyone a bumper length of 24 and a leader length of 24 and just go fast. There is some merit to it because a lot of times people troll too slow, but it's all relative. So I like to troll as fast as the flasher is telling me to troll. Jordan's on. Now we're gonna talk about fighting a fish, guys, because you're gonna watch Jordan. He's not gonna pump the rod. He's gonna keep that fish nice and tight. He's gonna pull it in,
On the Gomer reel.
He's on the Gomer reel.
Gomer reel.
want this
Don't
one
lift.
completely
Don't
cleared?
get. Oh, he's coming. He's right here.
Right here.
Oh, yeah.
Oh gosh, it's a
Nice
really
one.
nice
He's got a
one.
fin now.
Ready?
No, I'm tangled in the...
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna keep him low. Keep him low.
There we go.
Yeah, coming up.
Nice and up. He's to the weight. Nice big lift. Look at that. Woo!
What a beauty!
That's a good fish. Nice bright
Yeah,
fish.
baby.
But he reeled that lead all the way to the tip. Didn't pump the rod. Fish didn't really know what's going on. He's already unhooked. Unfortunately, he's a wild one and he's got to go back. But he is a freaking beauty. So what I'm gonna do here, he's hot. I've got that little duo snap, and this way I can like now take care of that gear. Now I can take care of the fish. Just an absolute. Jordan, would you call that one a specimen?
That's a specimen
That's
indeed.
a specimen indeed.
Wow. And one thing too, as I lifted, I took a big step back. I didn't take the time to go, oh, I want to see this thing go in the net. Took a big step back, kept it tight, and Cam scooped it right up with the net.
Look at that, guys. Unfortunately, wild, get out of jail free card, but this one, oh, I wish it was a hatchery, because it'd be coming home. See, it's freaking gone. Woo. Jordan fought that fish perfectly. Now, a couple things that we did to actually land that fish was, we really started with a tighter drag, because when you're fishing this fishery and you want to bring those fish up, and you got them on, if you fight them with a loose drag, the fish is able to run past the flasher, run past the gear, and you're not able to catch up because you got all that weight and all that drag behind it. So you want to make sure that those drags are very tight. Once again, 40, 50 pound leaders, you're not too worried about them breaking. But having that tight drag on the bite is going to hook the fish. And then when the fish runs towards the boat, like that one did, Jordan was able to keep up on it, and we were able to put it in the net real fast. A lot of times these fish don't even know I think what's going on, and they tend to shoot right at the boat. You've got to be able to keep up with them, keep those drags nice and taut. All right, so while I'm getting this leader ready to getting this spinner blade back out because it seemed to be catching the fish, I want to talk about it a little bit, because when we had a fish on that rod, you know, everyone gets chatting in the boat, people aren't paying attention, but it's always important to clear whatever rod is down boat from the rod with the fish on first. Get that one out of the way. So that fish was on this rod here. Casey was back there. He ripped that rod in super fast, got it out of the way, because it seems like if there's gonna be a tangle or a mess, that's where the fish is going first. But then also it's real important to clear all the rods, because those fish, man, those two came up to the boat, and I've got experienced anglers with me today. We put the net on those fish quick. We were able to land them. But a lot of times they're gonna run around, and especially if they come up to the boat and see it, they don't want nothing to do with us. They're gonna take off. You're gonna wanna make sure you have all that gear out of the way, because it's hard enough to land them as it is with one of these big leads and one of these big flashers. Don't do it with two. Trust me, it doesn't work. Now, one thing I want to point out, guys, especially when we were talking about the setups, is you notice that I'm not using any releases on the flashers. Like, I'm just one of those guys that just doesn't really believe in the release. And the release is something that if you were to get a bite and not see it, it is something that is gonna pop off. It's not gonna have that rod fishing effectively after that, because the bait's not gonna be tied to it. You're not gonna be getting the right kick. And it's just another variable that can just honestly go wrong while we're fishing out here that day. I know a lot of guys use them and find success with them, but what I find success with is guys that fight fish properly. If they fight fish properly, they tend to land more. Keeping that tension, keeping a lot of bow on the rod, not pumping the rod and the reel, and then making sure you get all the way to that lead and a good final lift, because especially when the fish gets to the side of the boat and people look at the fish, they see it and they think that they've done their job and they've done their lift. Well, that's the time the fish likes to pass the gear and starts pulling on those hooks and starts doing all this different stuff, to where I think most guys who have fished Short Bow Super Series have gotten fish to the side of the boat and watched them literally kick the hooks out of their mouth and then swim away. So stay with those 4 tips, tight drag, bow on the rod, lots of tension, reel to the tip and pull through at the end, and you're gonna land more fish.
Oh, fish, 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 fish.
Wait, take it.
Now, we weren't going to include this fish in this tutorial, guys, because it's caught on a triangle flasher, on a short bus triangle flasher. But guess what? You actually can use triangles and 360s at the same time. Straight up. Oh gosh. Oh my God. I don't know if he's long enough. He might be though. He'll be right there. That is wild anyway. Darn it. Another wild fish, guys. Barbo's hook. Beautiful bright Chinook. Get out of jail free card. Out of here. The season this year at Buoy 10, guys. Like I said, it's my first day out in the river. Just getting our feet wet. Season's just starting. It's still super early, but it's hatchery only this year. So that's why we're throwing this beautiful fish back. So sad. And let's be honest, that fish gave Clint every bit that he could handle. Like really good, really good. I mean, and it was only like 22 inches. So the cool thing was that fish was on a triangle, and the disadvantage of those triangles though, guys, when you're down here fishing is when you get those underlaying currents and all this water movement, you never know like what that triangle really is doing. You can see the line angle on top, but you don't know if that bait is spinning and stuff. And so if you can utilize some 360s while you're running some triangles, like, well, those 360s are down there and they're thumping away, there's gonna be movement on those baits. You can kind of utilize that with your triangles too, but I would just be very careful because it's very easy to tangle the gear that's kind of acting different and walking and moving different within, you know, underneath the boat. So if you're fishing multiple rods and trying to fish them, you just got to be aware of that. Make sure you use enough lead to keep everything kind of separated. The last takeaway when using triangles too while you guys are 360 fishing is always still do what the 360 is telling you to do. Fish your boat to where the 360 is effective and the triangle baits will follow. All right guys, so that's our little in-depth Short Buzz Super Series 360 flasher tutorial here. We got to come out here and enjoy and catch a couple fish. Casey Kelly put us on 3 good ones to start our season off, so I'm super stoked on that. And we'll hope you guys have a really great season. You know what, if you guys liked what you see here, be sure to check out some of these other great videos that you're gonna see up there. And don't forget, as always, if you're new to the channel, new to seeing these videos, you know, I'm sure this tutorial is gonna go out there to the world. And if you're new, be sure to like, subscribe, turn that little bell notifications, and you'll get a notification every time one of these little videos show up. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you on the water.